The ground beneath this town has been burning since 1962, and it has not stopped. Centralia, Pennsylvania. More than 1,000 people once lived here, raised families here, buried their dead here. Today, nearly every building is gone, the zip code revoked, and the fire beneath the earth could keep burning for another 250 years. To understand how an entire community was slowly erased from the map, you first have to see what Centralia was before the ground turned against it. In the early 1960s, Centralia was a stable, self-sustaining hub of Pennsylvania's anthracite coal region. Nestled in Columbia County within the western Middle Anthracite Field, this was a community built on hard work and solid ground. By 1962, the borough was home to 1,435 residents. It was a place of established families where neighbors knew each other by name and generations shared the same streets. The town's identity was anchored by the coal mines that ran far beneath the hills, organizing daily life and providing steady work. This was not a fragile settlement, but a bustling town with a solid social fabric. Residents supported 5 hotels, 7 churches, 2 theaters, and more than 24 local businesses. On Sundays, families gathered at the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Ukrainian Catholic Church, while during the week, children attended local schools. Mining shaped the rhythm of the seasons, offering a predictable, quiet life. The ground beneath their feet was a source of livelihood, not danger. No one living here in the spring of 1962 had any reason to believe their home would eventually disappear. Life in Centralia unfolded along a neat grid of paved streets lined with wood frame houses, front porches, and small backyard gardens. On warm afternoons, residents stood on sidewalks, chatting with neighbors, while children walked home from the public school on Locust Avenue. The daily routine was anchored by local institutions, the First National Bank, small grocery stores, corner saloons, and 3 local cemeteries resting quietly on the hillsides. These burial grounds were familiar parts of the neighborhood geography, where families regularly tended the graves of ancestors who had arrived during the coal boom of the 19th century. On Sundays, the bells of St. Ignatius and the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary echoed across the valley, calling families to worship. This was a place where roots ran deep. Neighbors celebrated weddings together, supported each other through difficult winters, and expected their children to raise their own families in the very same blocks. It was a close-knit community built on a foundation of shared labor, completely unaware of the vast, hollowed-out labyrinth of old mine workings that waited directly beneath their floorboards. On May 27, 1962, the Centralia Borough Council sought to resolve a routine seasonal problem. With Memorial Day approaching, the town needed to clean up the municipal landfill, which had recently been relocated to an abandoned open-pit strip mine on the edge of town. The pit, measuring roughly 75 feet wide and 50 feet deep, sat directly above old mine workings. To clear the accumulated refuse, the council hired local volunteer firefighters to conduct a controlled burn. This was a standard, routine practice for managing waste in coal country at the time, carried out by civic-minded neighbors with no intention of causing harm. The workers piled the trash, set it ablaze, and later used water hoses to douse the visible flames. However, state mine safety records and geological studies indicate this pit lacked an essential safeguard, a thick, non-combustible barrier of clay or shale to seal the garbage away from the earth. While alternative theories exist, the accepted historical account suggests that beneath the smoldering pile, the heat quietly penetrated the thin soil. On May 29th, the trash reignited. The fire had found a 15-foot opening, connecting the surface dump directly to the Buck Mountain coal seam and the vast, oxygen-rich labyrinth of abandoned anthracite tunnels waiting below. The Buck Mountain coal seam is a massive deposit of premium, high-carbon anthracite. In 1962, decades of coal extraction had left this coal layer fractured and hollowed out. When the heat from the landfill burn reached the exposed face of the seam, the fire found a direct pathway into a vast subterranean labyrinth. Surface blazes can be choked with soil, but an underground coal fire behaves differently as a concealed combustion zone. It requires only three elements to survive: fuel, heat, and oxygen. The fire entered a dense network of abandoned mine workings, hundreds of interconnected rooms, entryways, vertical shafts, and transport tunnels. These empty voids, carved out by generations of miners, functioned like a giant subterranean furnace. The Buck Mountain seam provided an almost limitless supply of dense anthracite fuel. The unsealed mine shafts and surface fractures acted as natural chimneys, drawing in fresh oxygen from the atmosphere while venting hot gases. This constant draft kept the combustion zone active far beneath the earth. While firefighters successfully doused the flames on the surface of the trash dump, the fire below was already detached, feeding on the rich coal and breathing through the network of abandoned tunnels. The fire, burning deep underground, began to make its presence felt on the surface through silent, invisible changes. Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, both odorless and colorless, slowly leaked upward. These toxic gases traveled through natural fissures, rock fractures, and basement walls, pooling in the low-lying spaces of family homes. Because these gases could not be seen or smelled, residents had no way of knowing their basements were filling with lethal air without specialized monitoring equipment. Along with the gas came a creeping, localized warmth. In some parts of Centralia, the ground itself grew hot to the touch. Backyards began to steam after rain, and cellar floors radiated an unnatural heat that warmed entire basements from below. This heat was not uniform. One block might remain cold and quiet, while a few yards away, underground pipes baked in dry, scorched earth. The U.S. Bureau of Mines, the CDC, and the Pennsylvania DEP stepped in to track the shifting hazard. Teams of inspectors monitored basement air and drilled boreholes to measure subsurface temperatures. Early containment efforts followed. Workers attempted to isolate the fire by digging defensive trenches, flushing abandoned tunnels with water and sand, and sealing surface openings to choke the fire of oxygen. Yet beneath the pavement, the temperature kept rising. As the subterranean fire consumed the supporting coal pillars, it left empty voids deep underground. When the overlying rock and soil could no longer bridge these hollow spaces, the ground above began to sink and collapse, a geological process known as subsidence. This instability slowly altered the town's surface. Fine cracks in the asphalt widened into deep fissures, backyard lawns developed unnatural depressions, and paved streets buckled under the shifting weight of the earth. The hazard was no longer an invisible threat. It was actively reshaping the physical environment. On February 14, 1981, this physical danger became a reality for 12-year-old Todd Domboski. While walking in his grandmother's yard, he noticed steam rising from the grass. As he stepped closer, the sod collapsed beneath him, opening a sudden sinkhole that dropped him into a hot, unstable void. Clinging to exposed tree roots, he shouted for help as toxic gas filled the pit. His cousin, Eric Wolfgang, rushed to the opening and pulled him to safety. The rescue was successful, but the event proved that the danger was no longer confined to the deep tunnels. By 1983, decades of failed containment efforts made it clear that the fire beneath Centralia could not be stopped. The subterranean blaze had outpaced every trench, barrier, and flushing operation. Recognizing that the underground tunnels would continue to smolder, government officials shifted their focus from saving the land to protecting the people. In November of 1983, Congress approved an approximately $42 million federal appropriation to fund the Centralia Mine Fire Acquisition Relocation Project. This massive program was designed as a safety response to the worsening geological instability, aiming to buy out local properties and relocate families away from the rising gases and collapsing earth. In its initial phase, the acquisition program was voluntary. Many residents, exhausted by the daily anxiety of monitoring carbon monoxide levels in their basements and watching cracks widen in their living room walls, chose to accept the government's financial offers. As these families packed their belongings and departed, their empty homes were immediately slated for destruction. State demolition crews systematically leveled the wood frame structures to prevent reoccupation and to mitigate safety hazards. The acquired properties were slowly transitioned into open space, state-controlled land, leaving behind vacant patches of soil where neighborhoods had thrived for decades. Yet, the administrative efficiency of the buyout could not mask the immense human cost. For the families of Centralia, these houses were far more than structures. They were the physical manifestations of a shared history. Many homes had been built by ancestors who worked the local anthracite mines, passed down from parents to children over generations. The relocation project slowly dismantled the social fabric of the borough. Neighbors who had shared porches, backyards, and lifetimes of mutual support were scattered across neighboring municipalities. The daily routines of the community withered. Local businesses, losing their customers, shut down. The congregations at St. Ignatius and the other local churches dwindled as families relocated to distant parishes, leaving the old steeples to look over a shrinking flock. Throughout the late 1980s and into the 1990s, the nature of the buyout evolved. What had begun as a voluntary safety net felt increasingly like systematic pressure to abandon the town. Those who resisted the buyout watched the physical infrastructure of their lives vanish around them. Demolition crews left behind a surreal grid of empty sidewalks and lonely streetlights that illuminated vacant grassy lots where family homes once stood. The continuous exodus transformed the once populated borough into an empty, silent expanse. Historical estimates indicate that by 2010, roughly 10 residents remained in the community. This historical count serves as a measure of the town's near-total dissolution, marking the end of a community that had once been home to more than 1,000 people. While the relocation program succeeded in reducing human exposure to the toxic environment, the fire itself continued to burn. Below the empty streets, the combustion zone continued to expand, feeding on the rich anthracite veins undisturbed. For those who had left, there was no turning back. Ongoing ground instability and safety restrictions made the empty blocks uninhabitable, while the systematic demolition of houses meant the old neighborhood structure was gone. Yet a few residents refused to depart, driven by distinct personal motives. Helen Weimer, living on Wood Street, represented an uncompromising devotion to her home and family heritage, refusing to let an underground fire sever her ties to the past. Stephen Hajnowski, a former borough council president, approached the struggle as a legal battle for property rights, driven by a deep distrust of the state's safety justifications. The conflict reached a crisis in 1992 when Governor Bob Casey invoked eminent domain, condemning every remaining structure in the borough. What followed was a 20-year legal battle fought in state and federal courts. The dispute finally resolved in October 2013, when the Commonwealth and the last 8 residents reached a settlement. The agreement paid the homeowners a total of $349,500 and allowed them to remain in their houses for the rest of their lives. They paid no rent or taxes, but they could not sell or pass the properties to heirs. Upon their deaths, the deeds would automatically transfer to the state, and the homes would be leveled. This compromise allowed the final holdouts to age in place, keeping a quiet vigil over a town slowly disappearing from the map. Today, Centralia exists as a grid of empty streets leading to nowhere. Where hundreds of wood frame homes once stood, there are only open, grassy lots separated by cracked sidewalks and rusted fire hydrant. The asphalt on some of these abandoned roadways is split by wide fissures, occasionally venting faint plumes of warm steam into the cold morning air. Yet most of this quiet area remains still and overgrown. Beneath the encroaching brush, the concrete foundations of former residential blocks are the only structural footprints left behind. The public roads that still skirt the perimeter provide a safe passage for those looking across the cleared terrain. Above this vacant valley, 3 cemeteries rest quietly on the surrounding hillsides. These headstones remain undisturbed, still visited by family members who return to tend the graves of their ancestors. They serve as enduring markers of historical continuity, anchoring the memory of a vanished town to the very earth that eventually forced its people away. In 2002, the United States Postal Service officially revoked Centralia's zip code 17927, routing the remaining mail to nearby Ashland. This administrative decision quietly erased the borough from federal maps, even as the fire below continued to breathe. Today, state technicians monitor the subterranean heat through thermal mapping and gas measurements. Fueled by the dense, unburned deposits of the Buck Mountain anthracite seam, the fire draws oxygen through old mine workings. Geological projections suggest enough coal remains to sustain this active combustion zone for another 250 years. Today, this quiet valley stands as a sobering warning. As the underground embers continue their slow, relentless march, they remind us that the scars we carve into the earth can outlast our own existence. The community is gone, but the ground remains a monument to what we cannot control. Some fires are simply too deep to extinguish. Thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts below.